guys, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Today's video is going to be all about what it is like being on reserve. We're going to talk about how scheduling works, crew scheduling, and just like what to expect, because most people, when you become a flight attendant and you get out of training, you're going to be on reserve. And it's kind of important to know what you're signing up for, because it is different having a line versus being on reserve, which we'll talk about when we get in this video. But yeah, I hope this video helps you all when deciding if you want to become a flight attendant, or for you new flight attendants out there who are going through training. I hope this gives you kind of an insight of what you're signing up for. So stay tuned, keep watching, and we're going to jump right in. All right, y'all, let's get started. I do have my handy dandy notebook, and I'm going to be looking down because I have some notes for y'all to kind of guide me along this video. But first, we're going to talk about what it is to have a line versus being on reserve. So having a line, well, let's talk about reserve first. I guess it doesn't really matter. But when you're on reserve, that means that crew scheduling calls you, you don't know where you're going ever. Like, you're just going to get called during your reserve period, and you're going to be basically filling out those trips that people call out for, that it may be EROP, somebody like gets hurt on the line, things like that. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm probably never going to get called, because like, how often does that happen? Well, it happens all the time because people call out all the time. So you're definitely going to get called, especially with my airline. I have never not been called ever. In the 6.5 months I've been here, I've never not been called. So things happen where people call out, they may be missing flight attendants, all that good stuff. You are going to get that call to go to that location. They may deadhead you in or whatever to get you to where you need to be to work that flight. So that's what reserve is like. It's very spontaneous. You may wake up at 7 in the morning and you may be going to Nashville, and you may be going to Dallas. Like, you don't know where. Like, when you wake up that morning, you have no idea where you're going. That's basically what being on reserve is like. Versus having a line, when you bid for your schedule, if you want me to make a video on bidding, I don't really think that would be that helpful, because I feel like every airline is so different when it comes to that. But if you want me to make a video on bidding, I will. But back to what I was saying, let me stay on track. If you have a line, when you bid for your schedule, you'll bid for a line that has a set number of trips. So you know exactly where you're going that month. You know, okay, I have a 4-day, I'm going to Nashville, then I lay over in Houston, then I go to LA, then I go back to base to Orlando. So you know where you're going, basically. For the entire month. That's what having a line is. So the lifestyles are very different, just because you can't prepare for anything on reserve versus, having a line, you can prepare, like you can prepare your layovers like that. Your schedule really isn't going to change unless a flight gets canceled for some weird reason, but your schedule is just pretty much consistent. Like, whatever you bid for, whatever set of trips that you have, those are your trips. Being on reserve, you don't know what your trips are going to be. Pretty much sums it up there. So with my airline, we have 3 reserve shifts. We have A shift, which is midnight to 10 a.m. So that means you're on call during that time. Meaning when crew scheduling calls your phone, they're going to call you and they're going to say, hey, Dia, you have I don't know, if you're on reserve A 5 a.m. report time on Tuesday. Like, they're going to call you during your reserve shift. They may call you at 2 a.m. because we have to have a 2-hour grace period. Like, they have to call 2 hours before a trip for my airline. So they'll say, hey, you have a trip at 5 a.m. That's your showtime, and hang up. It's that simple. That's just what crew scheduling does. And then you have to report at your showtime, and then you work the trip. So that's kind of how that works. So reserve A, ours is midnight till 10 a.m. Then we have reserve B, which is 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then we have reserve C, which is 2 p.m. to midnight, so 12. So as you can see, it kind of all cycles around they have they have reserves for each period that they may need to call you. Now, you can bid when you're bidding. That means bidding is basically like you're bidding for your schedule. You're saying when you want to work, or this, that, and the third, or the days off you want. So for me, I usually bid for reserve B, and it's because I'm a commuter. So 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Till 5 p.m., meaning they can call me at any point during that time. I have to answer my phone. And if I don't, for some reason, let's say I miss their call, then I have 15 minutes to call them back. So they'll usually leave you a message or something and you give them a call back. So that's the reserve shifts. Like I said, they can call you during that time period, but let's just say, for instance, you're reserve A, so you're midnight till 10 a.m. They could call you at 10 a.m. and give you a trip for 5 p.m. So your reserve shift doesn't mean you necessarily have a trip during that time. It just means that's the time that they can call you. But if they need you for a later trip, guess what? You're gonna work that later trip. So just be prepared for that, because stuff like that goes down, y'all. But it's not as common, let me say that, but it does happen. Like, I get called to do a trip outside of my reserve period all the time. And I think like a lot of newbies, especially in my airline, they get confused about that and they'll be like, oh my God, like they called me for this and it's outside of my reserve period. I'm like, they're definitely legal for that. You're definitely legal for that, because your reserve period doesn't mean that it's your show time. It just means that it's your call, like you're on call for that time. So that's kind of how that works. I'm talking really fast, but I hope y'all are kind of grasping what I'm saying here. Now crew scheduling, you hear this, if you follow any of like the funny, Instagram pages where they talk about crew scheduling all the time. I'll post some like little memes and stuff around, because people talk about crew scheduling. They're like, we are owned by crew scheduling. Reserves, you are owned by crew scheduling. That's basically a group of people hired by your airline, and they organize everything. They figure out, we have 20 trips and we need this many flight attendants to cover these trips. That's who crew scheduling is. Those are the people that are going to call you. They're going to make sure that you're there. If you're late, that's who's going to call you. That's who crew scheduling is. They schedule the crew, basically. So, that's basically what crew scheduling is. Now, during EUROP, reserves do get used like crazy. We get used and abused, and that's a whole nother video within itself. But during EUROP, that just means when your company is going through maybe a bunch of cancellations, or they're going through a bunch of delays, or just madness is happening, or they may have like added a bunch of new routes to your airline, but they don't have enough flight attendants to cover it, which is going on in my airline right now. But that's needless to say. So things like that can happen, and then they need flight attendants to cover those trips. So again, that's where they pull in reserves from. So again, don't think because you're on reserve that you're not gonna fly or that you're not gonna get used for trips, because you do. That was like the main thing. I watched a lot of videos before I became a flight attendant, and a lot of people were like, oh, I sat ready reserve, and that just means you go to the airport, you sit for your time period. So for us, it's 5 hours that you sit at the airport in your uniform, ready, just waiting on crew scheduling to call you. During that time, I usually watch movies, sleep, eat, all that kind of stuff. That's a whole little spiel on ready reserve. It's not really a lot to it. It just means you literally show up to the airport. Let's say they have you show up for a ready reserve at 5. You may sit from 5 to 10. They may not call you during that time, and then you just go home. But yeah, that's what ready reserve is. So reroutes during your reserve, let's say they give you a 4-day trip. I hope this does not get confusing. I'm going to try to paint a picture for you here. Let's say they give you a 4-day trip. You end, let's say it's day 3, you're in Vegas. Okay, you're in Vegas, crew scheduling calls you. Mind you, you're only on day 3. The 4th day you go back home. My base is Orlando. So they'll get me back to base the last day. Day 3, they call you and they say, hey, because they can work you for 6 days straight with my airline. So they say, hey, we're rerouting you. You're not going back to Orlando tomorrow. You're actually going to Houston tomorrow. And then it's going to end up being a 6-day trip, because you're going from Houston to Orlando the next day. So then it goes from being a 4-day trip to a 6-day trip. I hope that makes sense, because I get what I'm saying, but I know it's going to be hard if you're not a flight attendant to get what I'm saying. So Yeah, I hope that makes sense. So you can basically be extended or rerouted. That would be considered a reroute. Now, let's say I get back into base. Day 4, I have to call and be released. And what that means is I call crew scheduling after I get done with my trip on day 4. And I say, hey, my employee number is this, that, and the third. I'm calling to be released. They're going to say, okay, please hold. They'll have you on hold doing their stuff in their computer. I don't know why I'm doing this. I feel like this is what they're doing, like looking up stuff in their computer. But they'll look stuff up in their computer. They may already have another trip assigned to you. Sometimes I get on the ground on day 4 and I refresh my schedule and I already see they've assigned me 2 more legs or 2 more trips, 2 more days to my trip. So when you call, they might say, hey, you're actually being extended. There's a trip. Let's say you got in at 5 p.m. There's a trip at 9 that you're going to work that flight, or you're going to deadhead here and work the flight from here to here the next day. So your life is so spontaneous and you need to be prepared to be flexible as a reserve flight attendant. Flexibility is key. Like, you gotta be. You can't go in thinking like, oh, I'm going here. Don't make plans. That's a number 1 tip I can say. Don't make plans. Like, I saw some people, I was out of town. I was in New Orleans and they were missing 2 flight attendants on my flight. And they pulled some flight attendants that were getting off. They had a 40-hour layover in New Orleans, thought they were about to have this nice long layover, made all these plans. And guess what? They were going to Atlanta that night. They were no longer going to have a 40-hour layover in New Orleans. So that just kind of tells you, like, your life, it's all sporadic. Like, it's a mess as a reserve flight attendant. But it's fun. Like, and you kind of have to learn to embrace the chaos. Like, don't get caught up in the negativity of it, because you will meet people who've been on reserve for longer than they want to. And they kind of get frustrated. And they kind of become negative about it because they're like, oh, I'm getting used and abused by crew scheduling. But you just got to remember, one of my trainers said, remember your why. Like, remember why you became a flight attendant. And so on those days that you've worked 3 legs and you think, oh, I'm going home, and then they make you work another flight, just remember, I signed up for this chaotic life, and it's going to have its good days, it's going to have its bad days, but I'm here for the party. That's what I try to do, you know? Stay positive with it, because it can become a little stressful. Like, you can kind of like, especially when you've worked a long day and then you get extended, like those days are kind of like, why am I doing this? You know, you kind of have that overwhelming feeling, but it's okay. Like, take a deep breath. Just remember, I signed up for this. I went through training. I was excited. I wanted to travel. I loved people. Remember all that stuff you said in training? Well, guess what? You about to like live all that stuff through. So they're definitely going to work you. Next, I'm going to talk about the union. So not all airlines are unionized, but the reason I'm bringing up the union, my airline is unionized. I'm bringing it up because they are there to protect you if you are being abused by crew scheduling. If something happens to where you were not legal for a trip, or they violated your 24/7, meaning you had worked 6 days and then you're supposed to be off for the 7th day and they're violating it, that's what you have your union there for, to protect you as a reserve flight attendant. Because let's be honest, I mean, they're there more for reserves than they are for a line. Like, if you have a line, you aren't really getting abused as much because things aren't really happening. Like, you know your schedule, versus reserves, we do get abused sometimes, you know, and they do violate your contract sometimes. And that's what the union is there for, to fight for you and make sure that things like that don't happen. And if it does happen, then, you know, you're protected by them and they're gonna, you know, fight for you and make sure you're compensated for it. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on the union. Some people like unions, some people don't. I mean, I don't really want to get too much into that because, again, it's something you won't understand until you're out there on the line. But that's kind of what the union is there for, to protect you as a reserve flight attendant. Now, being a commuter on reserve, I'm a commuter. I commute from Atlanta to Orlando. I told you I'm reserve B, meaning 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So, but the earliest shift that I could work is 9, because they have to give you that 2 hours. So I have to be in base. Technically, I'm supposed to be in base at 7 a.m., but I need to be ready to work. I think I could have a trip as soon as 9 a.m. So I need to be there to work that trip. So one of the reasons I like being reserve B or C is because I can commute in the same day. There's so many flights out of Atlanta. So it's kind of important to know where you are, like your location. If you commute from Atlanta, there's lots of flights. It's one of the biggest airports I don't know if it's the world, but I know it's at least one of the biggest airports in the United States. So there's so many flights that go from Atlanta to Orlando that it's not really as hard for me to commute being a reserve flight attendant, but it can be difficult if you are commuting from a place that there aren't as many flights going out, because you may miss your flight. Like, things happen. I'm just became protected under our commuter policy. So after probation, we have this thing called a commuter clause, and that's just to say, like, let's say you missed your flight, because things do happen, especially during the holidays. Like, shit happens. So you may miss your flight to where you were there at the airport for your flights, you listed, you were ready, and the flights were just sold out. Then what do you do, you know? So the commuter policy basically says that if you don't make it in base and you have tried, I think it's like 3 different attempts to make your flight, then you're protected, and you don't get points or anything like that. So that's wonderful for commuters, definitely. But as a commuter, being on reserve, some tips that I can give you is pack food. I'm not always good about doing that because I'm so like YOLO, like just kind of like I'll figure out when I figure it out. But pack food, because like, let's say I commute in at 7 a.m. and I have a ready sit, right? Sitting at the airport for 5 hours. I could get called or I could not, But like, if I'm sitting there, of course I'm going to be hungry, and I get tired of eating airport food. You're going to get tired of eating plain food. So definitely pack you a lunch as a reserve flight attendant commuting. It will just save your life. You won't be stressed out because your girl gets hangry real fast. So to prevent that, definitely pack food. That's my #1 tip. And then as far as like packing, just make sure you pack well-rounded as a commuter, because it's getting cold outside now, and like here in Atlanta, it's October and it's chilly outside. Like right now it's like 50 degrees, but in Fort Lauderdale, guess what? It's like 80 degrees outside. So just make sure you're packing for that. It's difficult. I've never worked as a flight attendant during winter, fall season, so it's still like an adjustment for me. But just make sure you bring your jackets. Make sure you bring pieces that are good for layering. I am going to make a separate video talking about things that I pack. I feel like that would be kind of helpful. I mean, of course, it's only good for women, but I think it's kind of helpful, for you to know kind of what to pack or what's good packing pieces to buy. Yeah, I think that's all I have on being a reserve flight attendant. It's chaotic. Be flexible, be prepared, don't get stressed, take a deep breath. You got this, So I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below if you have any questions. I tried to cover everything that I thought was important, because I could go on and on and on for days about it, but I tried to cover everything that I thought you needed to know. But like I said, comment down below if you have any questions. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.